Tonight we're going to start studying the Bible chronologically through, and we're going to start in the book of Genesis, and we're going to start with what would be called the creation stage, okay? The creation stage is really going to include the Genesis 1 through 11. As we know, Genesis 1 through 11 is the foundation for so many things we know in the Bible, isn't it? It does cover the origin of all things. That's a very important foundation. It covers the corruption of all things. What went wrong? Then the condemnation of all things, the judgment of God that came down, and then the confusion of all things at the Tower of Babel. So we'll be looking at those things next few weeks, and that's the creation stage. It'll take us a few weeks to get through these Genesis 1 through 11. Now, before we get started with Genesis 1, let me just give you some interesting features about the book. This is one thing, when Dr. Wilmington would put books together, he was very good at just coming up with little things about the book. So here it is. The creation account includes everything from electrons to galaxies, from dinosaurs to dandelions, and from Adam to angels. This stage is the only one that describes God as resting. It gives us the first human to be created and the first human to be born. There's Adam and Cain. It records the first man to die and the first man not to die, which was Enoch, was not to die. The first man to die was Abel. We're introduced to a serpent, a raven, and a dove, and all of them had significance in the study. The glory of God in creation and the grace of God in salvation are both clearly seen in the book of Genesis. We see the world's earliest civilization, the Canaanite, and the world's oldest citizen, Methuselah. And this state describes the first marriage, the first murder, the first promise of the Messiah. It gives us the first illustration of human religion, which was the fig leaves, and the first example of divine redemption, the coat of skin. All this is in the beginning of the book of Genesis. As you see, the book of Genesis, and the title means sort of the beginnings. And so Genesis is the beginnings of everything. And so we learn all that in this very good book. In its pages, if sinners are drowned and a saint is drunken. So it covers everything, doesn't it? A ship settles on a mountain and a tower rises on a plain. The tower is but the beginning of 3 satanic attempts to consolidate religion around a project. 2 more will be followed. One was built near Babylon in Daniel 2, and the final one will be placed in the Holy of Holies in Revelation chapter 13 with the Antichrist. And then in Genesis 12 to 15, of course, is the patriarch stage. And we'll be looking at the key patriarchs, and here's some of the things that happens in those. Here a city is destroyed on the plains, and a boy is spared on a mountain. Here a son, Jacob, deceives his father Isaac, and later himself is deceived by his sons. Here we read the first barren mother and the first dying mother. Jerusalem, a type of the heavenly, and Egypt, a type of the worldly, are first mentioned in this stage or section. Here we learn about a king called Melchizedek and a cave called Macapho. Here the first of 3 biblical covenants are introduced. The Abrahamic covenant, and when we look at that, it's a very key passage of the Bible and chapter to understand all the other things. And it has to do with the land and the people. Then later on in the Bible, we'll find the Davidic covenant, and this had to do with a king to rule in the land over the people. Then we see the new covenant later on in Scripture that has to do with the changed hearts, so the people would land will allow the king to rule over them. Bethlehem appears where God's lamb would someday be born. Abraham climbs a mountain where God's lamb would someday die. And on this occasion, Isaac asked his father a question that would be answered by John the Baptist some 20 centuries later. The question asked by Isaac is, "Where's the lamb?" The answer given by John, "Behold, the Lamb of God who take away the sin of the world." The glorious summary heard in heaven, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing." The birth of Isaac marks the first of 5 distinctly aided conceptions in the Bible, excluding Christ's supernatural birth. The 5 are Isaac, Samuel, Samson, Shunammite's son, and John the Baptist. All these have some specific interesting facts around the birth of these people. So history first recorded revival is also described in Genesis. Genesis is the 4th longest book in the Bible, with 50 chapters. It has 1,533 verses, 38,267 words. and is quoted to or alluded to some 260 times in the New Testament books. So surely Genesis is a very important book of the Bible. And now we want to begin in our study, and the section is called the Preliminaries. And you have a handout there called the Preliminaries, and you can help us follow along a little bit there. You can see up there the things that you can fill in. That'll just help you to stay with me here and go along with me. But so we want to begin today with introduce this first chapter. And we'll get into some of these things that God did on these first week. Okay, now this is so foundation. We Christians who believe that God is the creator, we don't have a lot of problems with a lot of things. We just understand that. When evolution came along, it's because people wanted to kick God out. And when you kick God out, well, where did everything come from? Well, we got to make something up in a hurry because we don't have an answer. So they began with the process. Oh, it must be evolution. And then evolution is not enough time. Not 6, 7 times. Well, it must have been a longer time. So they began to say things and put other times and millions. The first time people have been talking about millions and billions of years and all that stuff. They had to have time because on their model, you can't do this in a few thousand years. It must have been millions because you can't see that happening. It must have been so long. So they come up. The Bible, though, is an answer to these things. And it's the only real legitimate answer to so many of our questions. So let's begin today. And we're going to look at the first part is the creation of all things. Now, in the Bible there, the first couple verses of Genesis is very important. Maybe you can see that. You can look up there if you don't have to. You can look in your Bible. If you can see, it's fine. But in the first verse it says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." Now, I believe at this point this is sort of important, I think, because that's a summary statement of what's going to take place in the next 2 chapters. It's a topical sentence, I guess you'd call it. And then in verse 2, all the way to the end of chapter 2, he breaks down the process of that. And chapter 2 specifically breaks down the process with man. But it's very important to understand because we get into the next verse, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Now this is important. We're going to come to something here in a future study here, maybe another week or two. And because some people says, well, between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's a big old gap in there. And many calls it the gap theory. And a gap theory says that somewhere between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, well, there must be millions of years. And what happened? There must have been an original creation. Then God judged all original creation. And then verse number 2 begins God's story of telling the recreation of things. Now, there's no biblical proof of that. And I'm going to say that we'll look at that a little more in detail there. But I'm just telling you that's what some people believe. And the reason they believe that, it didn't start in Christianity to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when evolutionary thinking came into the scene, and it scared some of the Bible teachers. Oh no, we've been wrong. We need millions of years, so we got to figure out where it goes. Let's stick it there. And some very well-meaning teachers put that in. Even a very, very conservative scholar, C.I. Scofield, with the Scofield Reference Bible, the old Scofield, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, he has a footnote about the gap theory. And Scofield lived during the early 1900s when a lot of this evolutionary stuff came along. Now, Scofield was a brilliant mind, a great Bible teacher, with great notes, but I think he panicked a little bit and had to figure out how to do this. And later, when they updated the new Scofield, they said, well, we better not, let's don't put that in there in the very first page of the Bible. So they sort of hid it back in Isaiah somewhere, but they kept it in it, but they moved it out of the Genesis 1:1, 1:2. And a lot of Christians was concerned about that until about the 50s. Some great Bible teachers, Gish, Morrison, different people began to look at creation from a whole different perspective and seeing things that a lot of people have missed, and they began to put out the good books on creation from Genesis. That helped bring along Ken Ham. Ken Ham has done a lot in the last 25 years of teaching the fact that the young earth is not some far crazy idea. And so we've sort of tackled that back in our camp, understanding that. And those who, and of course the unsaved people, they may not believe, but they don't believe the Bible anyway. So, but we'll come back to that in a little more detail. So Genesis 1:1 is just a big picture, okay? In Genesis 1:2, it begins to talk about that. Now, let's look at when it talks about in Genesis 1 and 2 there, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. I think God's just saying here that the first words out of the mouth was just a beginning piece. It wasn't the finished piece. It was just a big piece of planet. You know, and so it wasn't any detail to it yet. It was without form, without detail. You know, and that's how it began. It was darkness upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the earth. So here in the second verse of the Bible, we're introduced to the Spirit of God. In the first verse of the Bible, we're introduced to the God the Father. When we study creation, another time we'll study this in the Trinity too, all three people are involved with the creation act. God the Father is involved, God the Spirit's involved. We learned especially the New Testament, the book of Colossians, the book of Hebrews, that Jesus was the actually hands-on creator. So we'll see all that. So let's begin looking down through here. If you want to, in your outline there too, you may want to put in some things here. The creation of light. And God said, "Let there be light." And light was light, and God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Now that's always key, that down through the Bible He counts the days. This is the first day, this is the second day, this is the third day, isn't it? It didn't say this is the first period, this is the first eon, first day. And unless something is said to mean something different, then you just take it as it's a 24-hour day. Okay? And so we look at that. Now notice there's the creation of light on the first day. Not the creation of the sun. The creation of the light. Here's a little note on this. As we get into these verses here, the Holy Spirit moved, and that's talking about in verse 2 there. He upon the earth, the vibrated, or the idea is even hovered above the earth. From this ominous vibrating energy source began to flow our energy waves of heat and sound, magnetism. Thus, the created universe was energized. Okay, the energy, the universe was now getting life. Okay, the Holy Spirit was that source. The earth rotating on its axis also began at this time. Both energy and matter were now present in the space, mass, time framework, and the three basic types of force were now in effect, is what the scientists tell us. Gravitational, the force between two objects; electromagnetic, the force between electrons and nucleus of an atom. These are the building blocks of all creation. And nuclear, the force between a proton and neutron within the atom. You know, this sounds like real scientific stuff, and it's beyond my understanding of things, but basically the atoms and all this is the building blocks of all of creation, isn't it? Well, this began at that time. Now, the account indicates that this was a temporary light source of function until the fourth day, when the sun, moon, and star would be created. Now, there wasn't a sun, but there was some light. In my mind, imagine, what was the source of light? Well, yeah, I think even the Spirit of God's mentioned here. So that Spirit of God just glowing. So it's God's Spirit maybe here just glowing. Of course, it could be, the Son of God is called the light. He's called the light of the world. So I believe God is the light source here. A temporary light source. But we see a beginning of a night and day. So if you want to get on the first day, what does it have? The creation of light. And so basically the first day of creation showed us just a big blob of planet and light. It's interesting how God took it in steps, though, isn't it? Where did the building blocks come from of creation? From God Himself, didn't it? Sometimes the word ex nihilo, out of nothing. And Sometimes creation and God is a pretty big concept, isn't it? Because here it is. Let me just mention, it says, in the beginning, God. It wasn't the beginning of God. It was the beginning of the things we see now. God's eternal. There has never been a time without God. God didn't need us. God decided to create us, create the universe, to bring glory to Him, to share His glory with us. But God was, and the Bible even tells us all His plans were from eternal past. Even before we were born, God says that even before the foundation of the world was laid, the plan of salvation was already laid. Every little minute detail of creation was going through the mind of God. It's like if you're going to build some kind of a great project, you sit and you think it through, you build your plans, you come up with the little details, and architects are great about that. If I build a plan, it's just this little house, it just got little walls, it doesn't have nothing. But an architect with a mind, he has, that's a certain type of stone on the wall, that's a certain type of a garden around it, and they always very detailed. God is the greatest detail. I mean, when we get into creation, understand that everything is so detailed in His creation. Only God could have done that. On the second day, the creation of space and water. Look at this. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. You got the second day. So what did God create here? The second day, the creation of space and water. Okay, now it was sort of the idea of atmosphere around us. It describes a system that's not like we have today. It describes a vapor around the earth, a water over the earth, and a space in between the vapor. We do know that, according to biblical studies, that it was not a rain system kind of a world like we have now. Okay? And so the original creation had this watering system without a rain system. And so we know that everything was watered, everything was taken care of, but there wasn't the rain like we know it. And it is a totally different type of system. And as we get into this, you understand the world we live in now is not anything like the world that God created. It's been destroyed with the flood and a different system. And it was water, and atmosphere. And just to think, our atmosphere had to be just perfect for our creation. There had to be the right amount of gases and everything in our oxygen we breathe to breathe, and when He created this, He had to be in the right place. We're going to see that about with the sun and all that stuff. And God brought it all together. And God brought water. That's one thing that has sort of blown my mind around. The water we drink today is the same water Adam drank. Water hadn't gone nowhere. We have a lot more of it than Adam did because we believe the vapor canopy at the flood had sort of collapsed and we got more water around probably than he did, but it's still the same water. It's just been recycled for all these thousands of years. So we have water today that's the same as Adam. Now we have a different system than what Adam had. We have a system where it rains, then evaporates, goes in the cloud, and rains, and then runs off and evaporates. In Adam's day, because of the atmosphere was different, it was a different type of system. But we understand here then the understanding of this, the creation of space and water, the atmosphere we breathe. And so at this point then, the water was just sort of covering the earth. And now there's an atmosphere that man and birds and mammals can breathe. And then some kind of a vapor above it all to keep everything watered. Okay, so that's sort of what we get in day 2. On day 3, it's the creation of plant life. Okay? And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and so it was. So we understand, out of the water, then God brought the dry land. The firmament, the things we can stand on. And God called the dry land earth. Okay, why do we call this place earth? Well, God called it earth. It's funny, all the evolutionists call it earth, but where'd they get that term? Well, from God. So God told them it was earth, and said, we can believe. How come they call it earth? If they didn't believe in anything of Genesis, why didn't they throw it out and start over again? But they didn't, did they? God called the dry land earth, and gathered together the waters called the seas, and God saw that it was good. The first thing about, I believe our earth looked totally different than what it is now. I don't believe we had the divisions of the continents and everything like we do now either. I believe there was probably much more land, and there was more together. All the divisions of the continents that we have and the deep ocean basins was probably a result of the cataclysmic event of the Noah's day. And so every piece of land that God created in the beginning was usable. I don't think we had to, we like mountains here in West Virginia, they're beautiful and everything, but I don't think God really created things with these mountains, like the big mountains here, and the Rocky Mountains, the Himalaya Mountains, and all those things. There's a lot of scientific evidence how the plates that moved shift later and pushed everything up, and the mountains came up later. But I think it was all this land that was 100% usable. 100% usable, 100% usable year-round. And God began to give us the plant life then. In verse number 11, and God said, let there bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding the fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. Again, that's important. The seed is in itself. It produces after its kind. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And so God began, He brought the dry land up out of the waters, and the waters separated back, and He began to put plant life on it, and He planted, and He created trees, and the trees had the apple trees had apple seeds, and grapes had grape seeds, and tomatoes had tomato seeds, and they just keep reproducing themselves, and it keeps producing themselves over and over and over again after its kind. And that's sort of neat how it just keeps. My mom was moving out of her place, and there's an old rose bush that was growing there, and this rose bush has got its beginnings goes back to my mom's old home place where her grandmother planted, and where they'd moved to. And so this little rose bush, it keeps producing after its kind and keeps growing back. So I've got a rose bush now in my house that probably has its roots for more than 100 years ago. Because isn't that amazing that you can just keep something going, life producing life, life producing life? And that's how God created things. And even after the flood, when things had to start growing over again, the seeds were there to begin planting and begin to start life over again. And so that's the interesting thing. Let me do one more day today. I think that's all we'll get time for on day 4. The creation of the sun, moon, and stars. Okay, here's what happens next. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of the heavens, and give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. It's interesting that God created plant life before He created the sun. Okay? And the reason for that is one thing it proves is there wasn't a lot of time between the 3rd and the 4th day. Now, there was a temporary light, but we don't believe it was the kind of light that we see, the bright lights we have now, because plant life cannot grow very good it can't grow at all without the sunlight. And so those who hold, each day was like millions of years even, that doesn't hold. It couldn't be. Because if you had the plant life on day 3, you didn't have the sun to 4 million years later, you got a lot of problems, don't you? And so God created the sun. And here's one little side note here on this. On the first day God created physical light, He now creates special light sources. These heavenly bodies were the function of a threefold manner. Here's the function of these things. First of all, as signs. They teach and remind men of God's creative work. When I consider the heavens and the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. You know, when we look up and we see these, it's just an amazing fact of, boy, that's something. God must be behind it. I never have a problem looking up and say, well, wonder how that got there. There's some kind of process. I always think, well, God was great to give us those. And then it's for seasons. They function as a calendar, dividing seasons, days, and years, enabling men to accurately plan their work. Our seasons are just so on. We don't have to worry. Well, I wonder if winter is going to come in 3 months or 10 months this time. It's always it's just always, every 3 months we have a season change. We have that. Now, the season changes are much more distinct now than they were in Adam's day because of the different atmosphere and after the flood. But there still were seasons, and it was so God had to set Earth at the exact amount of space away from the sun, too close. When God created us the way we are, if He were too close, we would have burned up. I mean, you don't even have to be too much closer than we are now, you can burn up. If you get just a little bit farther from the sun, you're going to freeze to death in a hurry. And so the evolutionist says, boy, aren't we lucky that this old rock just stopped in the right place. That's what they say. Man, if we'd been a little bit further, we'd been boiled and we all froze to death. Could it be that God places this right? And everything is just so orderly, over and over and over and over again, rotating around the sun. And as lights, the third thing is replace the temporary lights, source of the early days. And Dr. Wilmington put a couple things in. Why did God didn't create the sun first? He created the earth first, where the priority was the earth was the most important place in God's place. This is where He was going to put His man, being His image. And secondly, the prevention. People have a tendency to worship the sun. A lot of sun worship. And God says, wait a minute, it wasn't created first. The earth was created and then the sun. So the priority and then to show mankind is not as important as the earth. The earth is very important to God because God put His most important things here. Now, there's a lot to do with, I admit there's a lot of things about the creative universe that I don't have all the answers to, and the Bible doesn't give us all the answers. Why did He put our solar system with these other planets? I have no idea. Why is there other planets? I really don't know. We can speculate or whatever, but they're just there because God was creative, I guess. And we're just a galaxy, the size of the universe, and we'll look a little bit later in some of these things, the size of the universe is so huge. I mean, it's just amazing. And we're just one little galaxy. There's galaxies out there that we don't know anything about. And we never will, probably, to eternity. Did God do other things in the past? Well, God didn't tell us. We don't know. I think it's going to be a real fun thing in eternity to find out, though, isn't it? God may say, hey, come on over here. Let me go about 3 or 4 galaxies over. I got something to show you guys. And it's going to be prettier in West Virginia. But I'm going to show it to you. And wouldn't it be great? And God can do that. And God probably will. Well, that's day 1, 2, 3, and 4. 24-hour days God created. God didn't need millions of years. He just had to speak. God didn't create a baby planet that grew into a big planet. God created a mature universe that we have today. And that's what creation is all about. So next week we'll look at some of the most important things He created, and we'll go on with that at that point.